You're like, not another video about these 4-cylinder piles, I can't take it. Well, if you're the type of person that jacks off the spec sheets, these cars aren't gonna get you off, that's for sure. But there is something special about them, and I like cars that have a little bit of history and story. Both of these vehicles are from different generations at this point, but their designers and engineers had a very similar vision, believe it or not, of what they wanted to accomplish. In the case of the S2000, this was the last car designed by Uehara-san. He was responsible for designing and developing this car to bring in a new millennium for Honda to celebrate their motor racing heritage. He was also the lead designer and engineer on the Honda NSX, which most regard as being one of the most innovative sports cars in its era.
I wanted to create a car that would give the driver pure satisfaction, making him say, what a wonderful day, after driving around the whole day.
Now, I may repeat myself in this video a couple times about this, but one of the things that I cannot believe is this car was actually being designed in 1995 and released as the SSM concept. That's almost 20 years ago that this was being dreamt up. Now, obviously, they didn't release it until 1999 as a 2000 model, but the core fundamentals were still there. And you take a look at what they accomplished with this and how relevant it is today, it's all the more impressive. One thing's for certain, we're not going to take a look at this beauty without taking a look underneath. One of the really nice things about the S2000 is the thought they put into the chassis. They knew people would be going to the track with this car, which means it's unique in the fact that it actually has built-in caster adjustment and built-in camber adjustment on every corner of the car. So there's no fucking around with camber kits or plates or any of that nonsense. When we go to the back of the car, it's much of the same story. We have, that's actually not it. We have the eccentric adjuster for the camber in the rear. And what are you doing?
Seeing if it's 12 inches.
One last stop to the front. You'll notice this has become increasingly rare in modern cars. You don't see an actual strut here. This is in-wheel, double wishbone suspension with a traditional shock absorber. And when you have double wishbone and a shock absorber on cars, as suspension compresses, you get more negative camber, which is sometimes more optimal for track performance over using traditional strut suspensions. So we're just taking a look at the underbody of the car. And not all is flowers and roses here, because one of the big defects of this car, and it's pretty well known, is it has really shitty aero. Of course, it's a convertible, it's not gonna have the best aerodynamics, but the underbody airflow compared to modern cars is not there. So you get a lot of lift in the back as the bumper parachutes, and that's why you see a lot of these track cars with these ridiculous APR and Voltax wings and splitters that look like they're off.
Not a downforce?
As we walk to the rear of the car, not everything's performance related. There is some accessibility here. So Honda's designed an integrated clothing storage hook on these two locations here. This is more for your summer apparel. And then if you have a winter jacket that needs a little bit more robust hanging, we just put the equipment there. As with most Hondas, this is no different. It's easy to work on. Things are logically laid out, like the clutch slave cylinder, and other things are just simple. But that doesn't mean Honda had everything figured out the first couple of years of production. They had problems with blowing diffs, very inconsistent transmissions the first couple of years. The AP1 motors had valve retainer issues, didn't have proper oil jet bolts. I mean, there's a whole slew of things that they didn't figure out until the AP2 when they started to improve things. So as a new platform, as a dedicated platform, this had its growing pains. Now, you've been under both these piles, this car and the FRS, which is more appealing, or at least easier to work out and more logically laid out?
It's Honda pile,
Yeah, why is that?
because it's a Honda.
What do you think about this 2.7 liter?
This car's incredible. If I were to buy a convertible, I'd take
that-
this over that hunk of junk any day.
That's a special feature. What do you use that for?
Clean your nails, because this car's such a piece of shit. It's got built-in nail brush.
That's what you want to listen to?
So where are you taking me?
Today's our couples massage.
That sounds wonderful.
Oh, good. Where are you going? Hey, come back here. Hey, I paid a lot of money for that. First thing you're gonna notice getting inside this car, and this is to quote a friend of mine, this is not a fat-friendly vehicle. One of the funny things about that fact is they sold over 110,000 of these S2000s worldwide. And over half of those, about 60 some odd thousand, came to the United States. Now, for a country that's historically stereotyped as a fat fuck central of the world, I would say that that's a little odd to me. But the truth is this car is not very accessible to a lot of people. Now, here's the conundrum about this car. Honda's engineers and designers were so focused on celebrating their racing heritage that they didn't really focus on accessibility. Now, they built a car that was a sports car that was attainable for the common man, which is great, and that's its huge strength. But its big weakness is, for example, if you're 6'2", you're gonna get in here with this top up and your head is just gonna be basically on top of this. With the seat back, you have no leg room. To make matters worse, the steering wheel is non-adjustable. You can't telescope it, you can't move it up or down. So that's gonna limit a lot of people from driving this car. The second thing is if you're of the female persuasion, or you have a girlfriend who's just straight up thick and juicy, she's gonna get in here and feel like she's in a fucking tuna can, because that ass is gonna be all over these bolsters, flattening it out. You're gonna be having to use leather cleaner to prevent cracks. The digital gauge cluster, partly inspired by Ayrton Senna's Formula One dash back in the 80s. This is a gauge cluster that a lot of people think is just absolutely fucking horrible. This car's purpose is one thing. It's a driver-centric cockpit. There's nothing else to do in this car besides drive it. First thing you're gonna notice about driving this pile with the top up, it's a total fucking rattle trap. The hinges, the frame of the top rattles constantly, and it gets worse with age. In terms of accessibility, this is exactly what the designers thought of, that people would be driving with the top down almost all the time. And that's when this car is in its natural state. I automatically feel like I'm in a completely different car. It's more comfortable, I don't feel as claustrophobic, and the driving enjoyment is just so much better. This feels like a complete sports car experience. From the suspension, to the chassis, to the motor, the transmission, everything was so well prepared from the factory to be able to track and autocross this car that I get in it and I just don't have to worry about all the crap that I have to deal with in a tuner car. One of the reasons why I chose a 2005 model year for this test is I feel it's the most evolved of the S2000s. They've taken off some of the rougher edges, they've made it more drivable. The 2.2 liter's been in production for a couple years now. The transmission bugs have been worked out, but most importantly, it's the last of the analog S2000s, or pseudo-analog S2000s, which means this model year was the last year that did not have traction control, did not have stability control, and did not have drive-by-wire. Now, if you're a younger person, you're not gonna understand this, but when I touch the throttle on this car, when I push the actual gas pedal down, this is what happens. It's instantaneous. And why? Because it's actually connected to a throttle cable. Now, if you're a little bit older, you kind of think, well, why is that a big deal? Well, when you're in a car like the FRS or a modern car, when you push the gas pedal on that car, this is what happens. See, the thing is with modern cars, they have a system called drive-by-wire, which is basically a glorified pedal that's connected to a digital switch that goes to the computer. It's a whole bunch of mathematical algorithms that tell the throttle body what to do. One of the reasons why I really like this model year is because it doesn't have all the aids. But just because it doesn't have all the electronic nannies doesn't mean it's any more stable. You have to be even more alert. And when I say alert, every turn this car wants to rotate. Under hard braking, it wants to rotate. So even if you're a seasoned driver, this car can and will bite you. Cars have gone away from the simplistic nature, the pseudo-analog nature, into a completely different realm. The new generation is no longer about driving enjoyment. It's about padding the driver cabin with as much shit as possible to distract you from driving. And that's one of the real sad parts about the automotive world. This car has a special place for those who really just enjoy a unmolested driving experience. Now we move on to the 86 platform. And this car started as a project from Toyota. Toyota said, Tada-san, we need a car that's going to rejuvenate our brand, bring some life into it or some youth. So Tada-san had a open book. He could do whatever he wanted. It could be expensive, it could be cheap. And what he came up with was a car, an entry-level sports car that was attainable for the masses. It started off as two FT86 concepts, Concept 1 and Concept 2. Now, much like the marketing disaster for this car, how it has 4 different names, the concepts promised a lot that the car didn't deliver visually. But the core fundamentals with the chassis, what they wanted to do with the low center of gravity, the accessibility remained in the production model.
だから多分運転いただくとですね、今までの車とは全然違う感じ。まさに道とかね、こういう景色と対話できる、運転しながら会話できる、そんな感覚がですね、味わってもらえるかなと、そんな思いがあります。
Well, Tada-san had a great idea, right? Let's make an affordable sports car. And let's make it have low center of gravity and have a great chassis. One of the key requirements to accomplishing this was to leverage their relationship with Subaru. This car would not exist without Subaru. Now the thing is if you ask any enthusiast what Subaru is known for, it's usually 2 things, all-wheel drive and turbocharged 4-cylinders, neither of which this car has. Now I'm gonna really make a point about this. When you get in this car for the first time, it's another driver-centric cockpit. There's not a lot to do in here, there's not a lot of fluff. But one of the biggest things and the most important things about this car to note is how accessible it is to a wide range of drivers. You would never think that you are in a sports car with how much leg room there was, how much seat adjustability, how much steering wheel adjustability there is.
ちょっとここがネガとしてトンネルがでかくなったりサイドシートって言われてるここがでかくなったりしてここのスペースがなかなか稼げなくて運転姿勢がね右寄り
You get in this car and immediately you're like, holy shit, this thing is simple. And that's by design. One of their key design elements with Subaru and Toyota was a back to the basics approach here. They wanted something that was free of clutter. There's no buttons on the steering wheel. They used a low glare material on the dashboard. The shifter placement, the parking brake placement, everything is just simple as possible. This car's interior, in terms of simplicity and ergonomics and accessibility for most drivers, is one of its best features, but it's also one of its fatal flaws. And the reason is, most of the American public associates simplicity with cheap, and this interior is a prime example of that. It does feel like they raided a children's toy store for all the knobs and switches that are in here. But see, what they did is they tried to confuse you. They tried to distract you because the seats are so good. The seating position, the gear shifter, the steering wheel, everything is so directly focused on your driving enjoyment that all these little problems that I'm complaining about seem to disappear. But in the course of long-term ownership, it really does add up. It's been a while since I've been into a stockish FRS BRZ. When you get into an FRS or BRZ for the first time, especially if you've been behind the wheel of an S2000, the first thing you feel right away is how much better the electronic power steering is over the S2000. It's night and day. We should do a review, the BRZ versus a horse.
Horse would win. More reliable.
Every new car with a dedicated chassis or dedicated platform is bound to have some growing pains when it's new. This car is no exception. The fact is that I can't even count how many issues this car has had and how many times it's been in the shop. From the peeling steering wheel to the shift knob basically delaminating, the throwout bearing sounding like a squeaky bed mattress. There's a whole bunch of other stuff too, but the thing is this car feels and behaves like a cheap compact car. Now, the biggest letdown about this car isn't the quality issues. It definitely is not the quirks. It's after getting out of a car like the S2000 is you put your foot on the gas and nothing happens here. It's just, it kills the entire excitement of this car when you know there's so much potential in the chassis. Let's cut to the chase. If you ask 10 different owners of this car what would make it better, you'd get 10 different answers. So in this, we're not even gonna go there. We're just gonna pretend for a moment that this is the mythical high performance model, the STI or the TRD car that Subaru and Toyota gave us with the extra horsepower to compete with the S2000, at least on paper. There's one thing you can say about having forced induction in this car, and it's different. Having a supercharger gives you that linear acceleration. Now down low it suffers from parasitic loss, of course, but you get this urgency throughout the entire rev band all the way to redline, and it's something that the stock car does not do at all. It just has this boring, sedate, slow build up all the way to the red line where you don't ever feel like anything's happening. You don't have to downshift as much to get the power that you need, because even in third gear, for example, where you just had nothing before, you now just have a rush all the way to the red line, so you can drive smoother, less frantically, and focus on your driving, whereas on the stock car, you're just constantly having to work the gearbox, constantly having to downshift to get the power out of it. With this setup, with the dampers, with the brakes, with the forced induction, this becomes a real, complete, and balanced sports car. Oh God, I had to check my underbody neon kit. I got a big car show tonight at Taco Bell. A lot of babes gonna be there, but we'll talk about that later. So If this was the high performance trim level that Subaru and Toyota released, and if all they did to it was give it the same wheel horsepower as the S2000, this would be the better car. I keep saying this, but I cannot believe this car was designed over 15 years ago. When you get in this car and you compare it to a stock FRS or BRZ, there's absolutely no comparison. This is a far superior sports car. Driving these cars on the street's one thing, but let's just take a quick drive on the track and see how they compare. So is there anything else unique about this? Is there a reason why the garbage can is next to it?
So we can put your car in there.
What are you afraid of?
Poison ivy.
It's hard to pull favors from Turbowski these days because he's so into American compact cars.